says it may seem unlikely, but the sounds are there. Here they are on the graph. Here they are on the computer.
All right, that's a monstrous version, Boris, isn't it, of kind of like taking a Coke bottle and going and getting the resonance?
Exactly, and that was the precise example that I plan to use in my film. We've got a guide with an Egyptian Coca-Cola bottle blowing across the end of it.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's it. The great thing about it, Art, is this. 4 months later, I was in Oregon, in the Columbia River Valley, with my friend Ward Stroud, who is a Yaqui Indian. He's a maker of ceremonial flutes. And lo and behold, his flutes are sacred to Mother Earth, and they're sacred instruments, and they're tuned to, you guessed it, F sharp, as are many of the American sacred flutes. They're tuned to F sharp because the shamans felt that this was a harmonic of Mother Earth, a sound sacred to Mother Earth.
So, in other words, the Great Pyramid itself could be something, Boris, connected to Earth itself for some reason.
Yes, exactly. And
wow.
It's connected, Art. It's connected with mathematics. Karl Monk has done some amazing theories, and there are formulas that describe the circumference of the Earth and the location of the pyramids of Teotihuacan and all sorts of wonderful things. So there are all of these sciences expressed in this structure, which we persist in calling a tomb.
You don't think it's a tomb?
No, I don't think it's a tomb for a very simple reason. They've never found a body there. There are no decorations. It is unlike any other tomb in Egypt if it's a tomb.
Therefore, if it is not a tomb, what do you believe it to be?
I believe that it was a scientific instrument. I believe that its sonic significance was that it would produce an altered state. I think they're doing some work at Harvard and also at Stanford, which we're trying to get our hands on at the moment. But if you subject the human body to a bombardment of certain key low vibrations or low frequencies for a week or two, it may tend to produce an altered state, make the body more accessible to healing, may even create out-of-body states.
Do you want to really go out on a limb and perhaps speculate about ultimately what you think this altered state might be? And I guess I'll just tell you where I'm driving. In other words, could the pyramids possibly, Boris, be some sort of Stargate?
Well, that's what I think they are. I mean, you said it, and so you said it first. I think it's very strange if you stop to think that if the pyramids were in fact built in 3500 BC, for the first 1,000 years of their existence, not a single mummy in Egypt, not a single mummy of a pharaoh was ever found in Egypt.
By the way, do you believe they were built then?
I have nothing to base it on, Art. I believe the Sphinx is older, only because of the brilliant work that I think Robert Schoch from Boston University did in identifying the marks on the outside. But the problem with the pyramids is you don't have an outside. It's been stripped away. Mm-hmm. I don't know when they were built, but I think I tend to think they're older. I mean, if you ask me for an opinion, I think they were older.
All right.
But assuming they were built in 3500 BC, there was the first pharaoh's body that was ever found, I believe, was in 2550 BC. So where were they all before that? What happened to them? And why did they have mummies in the first place? I mean, what was the purpose of preserving the body? And what was the purpose of creating this solar boat for the pharaoh's trip to the afterlife? Unless the Egyptians believed that somehow the pharaoh would go into that structure, and the priests would somehow send him into another state. That's what I believe it is.
Well, they were put in there after death, not just prior to, weren't they?
Well, it all depends on who you believe. I mean, yeah, that's what history tells us. But were they?
Boy, that's a very good question. One might imagine that that trip would be made while what we know as the soul would still be within the body, which might suggest they might try to get them in there just prior to death.
Yes, or possibly they might just put them in there when they were ready to go and create an out-of-body trance and send them on their way. There have been suggestions, according to Jim Hertog, there's some suggestions that the pharaohs were tested on their knowledge of the universe before they were allowed access into the afterlife, and so perhaps when the pharaoh thought he was ready, he just went and got in the box, and the priests made their sounds, and away he went.
Let me ask you a little bit about the, you said in the beginning, if you go into the Great Pyramid and you lie in the sarcophagus and you spend time, that you will begin to enter in some sort of altered state. Have you tried this yourself?
Yes, I have.
And?
Well, I've had a lot of very strange experiences there. I had one which was witnessed, which was documented, and that was that we were in there for the night, and I was there with another person, and I had some Tibetan chants that Dr. Hertak had given me, and I was playing them on quadraphonic speakers in the room.
Yes.
And I had a sensation that that I was going out through the top of the pyramid. And I can remember, and this was 1992, and we were in the middle of our Mystery of the Sphinx show, and I had the distinct impression that I was walking in the rain, and I thought, well, now this is strange, that I must be dreaming about my own show, because of course we'd stated that rain had damaged the pyramid, pyramid and the Sphinx. And I wound up, of all things, playing backgammon in a cafe at the foot of the Sphinx. There's a cafe where a lot of friends of mine play backgammon late at night, and I wound up playing backgammon with them. Now, some people go back and become Tutankhamun, and other people go get to dance with Nefertiti, right? I went and played a little backgammon with my buddies. And when they woke me up, I was very disappointed to come to in the pyramid. I thought to myself, well, I slept through my first night in the pyramid. And, what a bore. And when we went down, as we were walking down the stairs, my companion said, what did you experience? And I said, well, I went for a walk in the rain. And she said, that's ridiculous. It's July. Well, when we got outside the pyramid, that was the first shocker, because it had rained all morning, all night, and on into the morning there were puddles everywhere.
Really?
Absolutely. And you can believe this or not, and I'm not sure that I believe it or not, but when I went down to the backgammon game that night, I remembered something about having an incredible run of doubles from my dream, and I thought it was a dream. When I got down there, there was a wooden table, which is still there today. You can see it next week when you go, in which my friends had carved the run of doubles, 2 double sixes, a double 4, and 2 double 1s. And they had carved it into the table and said they'd never play the game with me again. Now,
boy, oh boy,
that's a pretty wild story.
Yes, it is.
And I've probably discredited myself now for the rest of the evening.
No, not at all, because I think everybody believes there is something to this. And I think that there is some sort of key with low frequencies, and it would make sense to me that if that is not some simple burial place for people, that it is indeed attached to the earth for a very specific, as you said, scientific purpose. And we need to discover that.
That's
and
right.
that would suggest that in some ways there was a civilization, in some way, far advanced from where we are right now, in a different sort of way. Would that be fair?
I absolutely believe it. I can't imagine that not being the case.
If there was this great civilization prior to ours, something the Christians will get very angry if we consider seriously here, and they built this instrument, this scientific instrument, literally in combination with the earth, then what may lie ahead? In other words, what may we yet discover? What secrets do you think the pyramid may yet hold, and the Sphinx?
Well, certainly they must have a lot to do with energy. Because if you look at the size of those stones, we, in the Mystery of the Sphinx, interviewed a crane operator who couldn't imagine how, even with modern cranes, you could place 200-ton stones from a sand base. They must have had something to do with energy. If you go to Baalbek in Lebanon, the stones weigh 1,500 tons, and they're piled 3 and 4 courses high. So obviously they must have known something about it. Must have been easier for them to lift stones than cut them. Otherwise, why would the stones be so big?
Well, that is another topic by itself. In fact, the Japanese, I believe, tried to duplicate, didn't they, Boris?
Yes, and failed.
And failed.
Absolutely. So that there must be a knowledge there having to do with energy, having to do with an awareness of where we are. Somebody told me an amazing thing today. I mean, we're one day after the autumnal equinox, if I've said that correctly.
Mm-hmm.
It was yesterday. It is apparently a fact, though I don't know it, that from outer space, if you look down at the Earth, on the day of the spring and the autumn equinoxes, on those 2 days,
Yes.
as the sun is leaving the pyramid of the sun at Teotihuacan, it is beginning to shine on the pyramid of Giza, and only on that one day. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it's been confirmed to me by a couple of people. It seems sort of unlikely, but why not?
All right, there is some thought that within or beneath the Sphinx, the paw of the Sphinx, may lie chambers in which something called the Hall of Records may reside. Now, that would be, or I guess is said to be, a sort of a library documenting all the technology of this previous civilization. Is that correct?
That's the story, yes.
Do you believe that?
Let's put it this way, Art. I know there's a chamber there because I've seen it on 2 different scientific instruments. In 1991, Dr. DeBecke documented a 30 by 40 foot rectangular anomaly about 35 feet below the surface under the paws of the Sphinx, and he did that with seismic technology. We went back there in the spring of 1996, and Dr. DeBecke, with ground-penetrating radar, confirmed that there was, in fact, a rectangular anomaly under the paws.
This was part of the shore expedition or not?
This was, the first time was the John West expedition.
John Anthony West?
Yes, and the second time was with part of the shore expedition.
So in other words, through ultrasound, and then now through X-ray as well, there's confirmation in both technologies that there is a chamber indeed under the Sphinx.
Right. What's in it? That's another story. I'm perfectly willing to accept that there's a library down there, but I think that I still believe that the obvious clue to the existence of an advanced technology is 500 feet above the Earth in plain sight. I mean, you can walk in there for $6 and have a look at it, and measure and test, and to your heart's content. There's nothing secret about it. We just don't understand how to figure it out yet. like Rubik's Cube or something, you know. I mean, if you don't know how to do it, you can't do it.
All right, well, an expert on the pyramids. Once again, here is Boris Said. Boris, welcome back.
I don't know if I'm an expert on the pyramids, Art. I'm a documentarian who's had some extraordinary experiences there. I don't think anybody's an expert on the pyramids.
Well, that's a good point. And I guess we are just, a lot of what we're talking about is conjecture regarding why they're there, how they got there, and what they're for.
Exactly. I think the one thing that's at the bottom of all of this is that we've got to look at it. I think that to simply dismiss something that awesome as a tomb and ignore the fact that there are pyramids in England and Japan and China and Tibet and
Mexico,
all through Central and South America, is doing somebody a disservice, doing ourselves a disservice by not investigating these things.
How can you imagine, since you mentioned that, Boris, that I can certainly imagine in Egypt, for some reason that we might not imagine, they came up with the concept of the pyramids and built them somehow. All right, but the rest of the world then was not even connected. So how could pyramids appear across the rest of the face of the globe?
Well, it's a great question. If we're going to view the thing three-dimensionally, I mean, I heard you say that my good friend Michio Kaku is going to be on Wednesday night.
Yes, he is.
He's a great believer in the fact that you cannot understand the universe if you look at it as three dimensions. If you look at the drawings on the plains of Nazca and try and imagine how they could have been done by somebody on the ground. So many of the monuments on the world, all over our world, had to have been conceived from a height. Otherwise, how do they manage to make them? How do they manage to do these huge drawings that span miles, acres?
I don't have a clue.
That's right. So to assume, first of all, I think it's wrong to assume that the first pyramids were in Egypt, because we don't know where the first pyramids were. I mean, there's one in China that's now destroyed down to, I guess, to within 10 feet of the ground. It's supposed to be a mile on a side.
Whew.
And
Which they date to when?
I don't know. I don't think they do. I don't think they can. I don't think there's enough of it. The problem is that you get experts in that field and they pontificate and say, well, this is the date. And that's where their error is.
They're guessing.
That's right.
There really is no way, carbon dating and all the rest of that, there's no way.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about it. I understand that there's a way now of establishing that there's some sort of cosmic radiation, and you can measure that if you get the right kind of samples. But again, that's over my head. What I'm advocating is that we look at these things, and we look at them and not hide them, and not pretend that they're not there, and above all, not keep this knowledge from people who are curious, who are interested, who'd like to have opinions on it.
Well, I certainly agree with you regarding Professor Kaku, who will be here Wednesday, that it is arrogant for us to believe that we can understand all, looking at things in simply 3 dimensions, when there may be many, many more, which will bring insights and instant understanding when we can get to those dimensions. And one has to wonder if what we've been discussing about the frequency and the altered states produced inside the Great Pyramid might not be the gate to get one to that understanding.
Well, every civilization before ours has believed in something of that sort. The Zulus and the Aborigines and the Maoris and the Native Americans, the Hopis, all believed that there was a way of getting to the center of the earth, or in any event to get out of here, to get into another dimension.
Mm-hmm.
So why suddenly are we not believing this?
All right. I've got a couple of tough questions for you. Well, I guess we better start with, you became involved with the shore expedition how long ago?
Okay, and I became involved with the shore expedition in 1995.
95.
In the summer, in the fall of 1995.
And what was the idea? What was the expedition going to do?
Well, let me start one step back, Art. I had gone to Egypt in August, basically on a free ticket from TWA on some air miles, because nothing was happening. I was trying to market a program, oddly enough, about Michio Kaku's work. And I went to call on Dr. Hawaz because I thought that we had used him rather badly in Mystery of the Sphinx. He had opposed everything John West wanted to do, and I thought he sort of came off as the bad guy in the film.
John West, actually, Anthony, is not allowed at Giza now, is he, or is he now allowed back?
Well, I don't know, and Art, I got to tell you that there is so much hurling of rocks and epithets and what one guy said and somebody else said. I don't know. John seems to have a knack for making people angry. I don't want any part of it. I had an expedition with John. It was, I thought, quite successful. It didn't end so well, but we certainly proved a point in spite of all the acrimony that there was between the Egyptian officials and John West. And I think that we established that there was probably a chamber under the Sphinx. I think Dr. DeBecke would rather use the word possibly, but in any event, certainly there was something worth investigating there. And I think that we established pretty clearly that a case for an older Sphinx, which is what we set out to do, and it entertained a lot of people, and John won an Emmy and so forth. To make a long story short, I walked into Zahi's office in August and I said, look, you know, I have an apartment here in Egypt and a horse, and I'd like to know whether there's something I can do to make this up to you. And he said, let's do another film. And I will be your Egyptian host and whatever, what would we do a film about? And we had a very affable lunch. And I suggested to him something I'd always wanted to do, which was a documentary about legends surrounding the Great Sphinx. I mean, there are legends of King Solomon. There are all kinds of wonderful legends. And Zahi said, yeah, fine, let's do that. And how can I help you? And I said, well, I'd like to bring a crew over and we'll film you talking about legends of the Sphinx. So he said, yes, I'll do that. And I went back to New York, and I raised $50,000 from two investors and went back to Egypt with a crew. And we filmed Dr. Hawaz in talking about pyramids and tunnels and all sorts of wonderful things. Mm-hmm. And at one point, he said, well, where, Boris, do you think this thing will be shown? And I said, I think it'll be a cable show. And he said, well, why not a network? And I said, because I think if you want to have a network show, you've got to have some extraordinary piece of news, something that will get their attention.
Sure.
And he said, what about if we open a tunnel that's never been opened before? And I said, where? And he said, under the Sphinx. And I said, that would do it.
That would do it.
Right. So Dr. Hawaz took us out to the rear of the Sphinx one day with our crew following along obediently. And he crawled down into a hole under the tail of the Sphinx, which we've since been in and done radar studies and found nothing, I might tell you. But there's a huge sort of an excavation inside the rump of the Sphinx, which has been all shored up like a mine shaft. They've been prowling around in there. And Dr. Hawaz allowed himself to be filmed standing in the bottom of that hole. And he said, it's a great quote. He wrote it. I wish I'd written it. He said, even Indiana Jones wouldn't dream to be here now. We're now inside the body of the Sphinx, and we don't know where this tunnel leads, but we're going to open it for the first time. So with that in hand, with that statement in hand and some lovely sort of images of the Sphinx and the pyramids, I came back to New York and set about selling a documentary.
So one of the networks. This time you were going to the networks.
And I went to the network. And one of the networks did, in fact, express some interest. And they said, look, if you're really going to open this thing, sure, we're interested. So at that point, I talked to Dr. Shore, who I knew had a great interest in this, and who I'd talked to before I went the first time and told them what I was going to do. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Shore said, well, we'd like to get involved, and I think the next amount of money we needed was $100,000. And he said, well, I'll put up the $100,000. And we entered into a joint venture agreement. And the deal was that he was going to be in charge of all science, and I was going to do the filming.
And when was this agreement entered into?
In December of 1955.
December?
1995.
95,
right.
Okay.
So we then went back to Egypt in March with a full crew for, I think, almost 5 weeks. And we filmed some beautiful tombs on the West Bank, and we filmed in Luxor. And then we came down to the Giza Plateau, and Dr. DeBecke joined us, and there was a lot of ground-penetrating radar and sonar exploration of the plateau. Mm-hmm. Dr. Shore had a 5-year permit from the Egyptian government, renewable each year, and that was what he was operating under, and I had a permit to film his work. And he was paying the expenses at that point. Every time we needed more money, I would say, shall I raise some money? And he would say, no, I'll put it up. And so he became de facto the financial sponsor of the project.
This is Mr. Shore?
Yes, Dr. Shore, and his foundation. In April and early May, Dr. DeBecke, with ground-penetrating radar, confirmed what he'd found in 1991 with his seismic work. He confirmed that there was, in fact, a chamber under the paws of the Sphinx, that it looked to be about 30 by 40 feet, and it looked to be about 35 feet below the surface. But, of course, we're dealing with shadows and disturbed earth. And
nevertheless, again, this is the X-ray, ground-penetrating X-ray that was confirming what the ultrasound had already done.
Exactly. He also, around the back of the Sphinx, discovered a tunnel about 2 meters wide that seemed to be about 15 feet below the surface, coming out of the tail of the Sphinx and heading in a westerly direction up under the causeway towards the Khafra or Chephren Pyramid. Now, at that point, Dr. Shore requested permission to do some diamond drilling and drill a hole down under the paw. And that was refused. They said, oh, no, you can never drill under this. You might damage the Sphinx, et cetera, et cetera. And basically, they agreed to take it under advisement. But Dr. Shore was running the permit end of things, you see. So I was just told, well, wait, and we'll have it for the next trip. Mm-hmm. So we came back in November. And in November, we brought Tom Danley with us. And took Tom Danley, that's when he did his resonance experiments up in the Great Pyramid, because I felt that the whole show shouldn't just hang on
whether or not you can drill underground.
That's right. If we get underground and there's a tablet that says made in Atlantis, well, eureka, nobody will believe it anyway, right? So I thought we needed some other corroboration besides just the records. And so Danley did his work, and we filmed all of that, and we got some wonderful footage. And also, we found an interesting thing. I had been told, and I got to go back a way, Art, here, in 1992, one of the plateau guards, for principally sum of, I don't know, $20 or something, took me late one night down a well.
I know. Now we're getting into the area of the photographs that I've got on the website, correct?
Okay, yes.
All right. What I'm going to want to do is, again, tell everybody the photographs we're about to discuss are on my website if you wish to go see them at www.artbell.com. And so with that in mind, we'll take the photographs one by one. So you paid somebody $20
to take me down the well, to take me down a well, take me down an iron ladder, a rusty iron ladder.
Where was this well?
Under the causeway leading from the Sphinx to the Chephren Pyramid.
Uh-huh.
And it was about halfway up the causeway.
Okay.
But the story that I was told by an old Nubian guide was that the well had been dug in 1946, after the war, in a search for water, and that there were two little Nubian kids down in the well chipping away with hammer and chisel, which was how they dug in those days, when the bottom of the well collapsed, and they fell about 30 feet.
Uh-huh.
And when the dust had settled and they lit their torches, they found that they were sitting, to their horror, on a sarcophagus.
On a sarcophagus?
Right. And there was a tunnel, they said, leading down towards the Sphinx. And that part of the story may have been exaggerated. And in that tunnel were other sarcophagi.
Uh-huh.
And they were terrified, and they ran up out of the well, and they said, we're not going back down there, and there's no water anyway, and the thing was abandoned. I have no idea if it's a true story or not.
It might have been myth.
Might have been myth. But 20 years later, they built the Aswan Dam, and it raised the water level, the water table, on the Giza Plateau by some 25 feet.
Right.
Or maybe even 46 feet, depending on who you believe. And to make a long story short, lo and behold, there was water in the well. And the Egyptians put a motor down there and a pump, and actually pumped water out of that well for 20 years.
20 years?
For quite a while.
Using it as a water source?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
From 1965 or 6 on.
Not trying to pump it out, just using it as a water source.
Using it as a water source.
Okay.
Now, again, that's hearsay, but that's what I was told. So in 1992, when we went down that well, at the bottom of the iron steps, which were pretty rickety, let me tell you, there was this cavern-like that was, I would say, filled to within about 6 feet of the ceiling.
All right,
with brackish water.
Leo, let me back up. I've got the first photograph, which shows the pyramid in the background, at least a portion of it. Uh-huh. Somebody's red car, and 1, 2, 3, 4 gentlemen there.
That's our film crew.
That's your film crew.
That's right.
And it shows this immense. Is that the well?
No.
I mean, it's an immense cavern of some
what
kind.
What we did at the time, in order to basically conceal the location, because everything was all secret, we were sworn to all this secrecy.
Sure.
We filmed these guys rappelling down that shaft, which actually led nowhere.
Boris, let's proceed with these photographs. The next shot shows this, I guess your cameraman, rappelling down the side of this incredible cavern that goes nowhere.
Right.
And I was thinking, here I am going to Egypt next week. I'm not going to do that. Maybe
I should stop you for a minute there, Art, because those are the two pictures that we basically took and we've talked about, because we didn't want people to know where this place really was that we'd found, because we hadn't found it scientifically. It had been a legend. It had been something we sort of stumbled on.
All right.
The rest of the pictures are absolutely and depict what's going on, but I thought maybe at this juncture I should tell you why I'm suddenly talking about all this after 2 years of silence, and why the need for secrecy in the first place?
Well, let's proceed. We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Let's proceed with your story. I mean, here
Right.
you were going down this rickety metal ladder into
Right.
into a well.
Yeah, and when we got to the bottom, now this is 1992, in the dark, I had brought a rubber flashlight and a mask with me, and I brushed away some of the muck and slime that was on top of the water, and lo and behold, it was as clear as Perrier under there. And much, I think, to my guide's horror, I went in the water.
You jumped in the water?
Well, I went in very gingerly because of all of the sediment that it aroused, and I dove down, took a couple of deep breaths, and sure enough, to the right or to the east of where we were standing, I had a compass with me.
Yes.
Was what looked to be a pile of stones. Now, you remember the legend, right? They piled some stones up over the tunnel to protect the dead and covered over the top of the sarcophagus and got out.
In other words, these two little kids, scared to death they had disturbed a sacred area, piled the rocks. Okay, yes.
There were clearly some signs of disturbed stones down there in the bottom of that well. And I just filed that knowledge away, and we went on, and we did our film, and we left, and so forth and so on. And now the scene shifts, and we're back in 1996. And I said, when it turned out that we were not going to be allowed to drill a hole down into the room,
right,
and when it turned out we weren't going to be able to dig down into the tunnel at the back of the Sphinx, I said to Tom DeBecke, our radar guy, listen, I know, what happens if we can get this radar of yours down 100 feet below the surface? Will it operate? He said, of course. And I said, well, let me go show you this well. So we went in the well, and I'm sorry, I guess DeBecke was not with us in November when I did this. What I did was I took Danley down there in November.
Okay.
And we went down into the bottom of that well, and lo and behold, the water had receded about 15 feet.
Ah.
And there were two sarcophagi in an intermediate level of the shaft. When you descend that shaft, there is a one level about 80 feet down, and then you go down another 40 or 50 feet to the bottom. And at the 80-foot level, there were two disturbed stone sarcophagi, outer casings, with the sarcophagus missing.
Huh.
And there was also an old iron pump, and there was, that obviously stuff had gone on there. But I had not seen that on my first trip in 1992, so clearly something had been taken down, a wall or something. They had done some exploration, because when I went down in 92, it was just a well shaft without this sort of second tier.
So they'd been in there since.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Now, when we got to the bottom, there was quite a lot of ground. There was a lot of water left, but there was an awful lot of space that hadn't been there before. And there were a couple of bones, obviously human bones, a femur. There were some little bits of fans. There were clearly some 90-degree angles and so forth and so on. It was obviously had been a chamber of some sort.
Yes.
So when I got back, I said to Dr. Shore, look, I think we should take the radar down there and see what's down there. And this now, we're at the end of 1996, at the end of the November expedition. And this is where the whole thing started to come apart. Now, again...
All right, but if I might, let's finish up with the photographs. There is now a third photograph of several gentlemen, one with a laptop computer, but you're in
That's
this...
Tom DeBecke. That's our seismic expert.
All right. All right, that's Mr. DeBecke.
We are down in the well chamber with the radar.
These, I mean, it almost, well, to me, it looks like a gigantic cavern.
Yes, except that it's got some right angles. It's got, when you're down there, there are clearly some walls. There are some steps cut out of one wall. There are some right angles and some what look to be collapsed columns.
Indeed.
It is not a natural cavern.
And then there is one final photograph, perhaps the most intriguing of all, and I can't exactly tell what I'm looking at here. It looks like it looks like some sort of sarcophagus.
Well, what happened was when we went down in November, when we went down in February, when we went back, and this is the expedition we got to talk about later, in clearing a level area to put our tripod. I mean, it's like the old story. It sounds corny when you say it, but we were setting our tripod up so that we could do a sweep of the room with the cine camera.
Right.
And the more we made an area flat, the flatter it got, until we realized it was in fact a flat piece of stone. And when we took some of the water and washed it off, it turned out that it was polished black granite. And when we cleaned it off some more, the edges were beveled, and it was clearly the lid of a sarcophagus.
Clearly, that's what it is.
Clearly, there's no question that that's what it is.
I imagine at this point you're feeling like Indiana Jones.
Yes. I mean, we were beside ourselves, and so we immediately we sort of wired Mr. DeBecke up. We had a like a bosun's chair to make it a little easier to get down, and we sent Mr. DeBecke and his equipment and his son down into that chamber and turned the radar on, and lo and behold, there was no sarcophagus under the lid. And the lid is almost 2.5 feet thick, according to Mr. DeBecke. It's colossally thick. We did a minimum of digging. It was illegal to dig. We didn't want to do any digging. We didn't want to upset anybody. So we had the radar, and he said the thing is more than 0.5 meter thick.
Uh-huh.
What he did find under this sarcophagus lid was a 2.5 meter wide, quote, anomaly, unquote, with a domed ceiling.
What? A 2.5 meter
wide, like a tunnel. He said that it was impossible for it to be a natural anomaly because it was, quote, steeply dipping, unquote. I'm quoting Tom DeBecke now, steeply dipping. It descended at an angle of about 25 degrees. It started out about 2.5 meters below the sarcophagus lid and descended directly in the direction of the Sphinx, 275 yards away.
Headed right for the Sphinx?
Yes, it is 2.5 meters wide and it has a domed ceiling.
All right, so in other words, if I'm guessing, and I talked to you earlier about this, you said they frequently would use sarcophagus lids to hide things.
Well, now, this is according to our good friend and scientific consultant, Dr. Jim Hertog, who was with us from the Academy of Future Science. He said that in the ancient texts there were a lot of references to the fact that in those days, because there was no such thing as grave robbers, they would often conceal a sacred chamber or a secret tunnel or something by putting what looked to be a sarcophagus there so that nobody would think of disturbing it.
In those days, it certainly would have worked.
That's right. So certainly it fit the legend of the story. I mean, if it can be how old, I had a line in my script, how old does the story have to be before it becomes a legend? It clearly fit the story that I'd been told 6 years before about that area.
Uh-huh.
And as far as I was concerned, that was all the proof I needed. And I went to Dr. Shore and I said, look, why don't we ask Dr. Hawaz to come down here and look at this? And perhaps we can persuade him to do a test with the radar where we know that there's a tunnel.
Wouldn't you be worried that Dr. Hawaz would come down there and look at the digging, albeit minor, that you had done and flip out?
Well, we actually sort of covered it over. I mean, the digging we did was not more than 3 or 4 inches. I mean, we really didn't do anything. We just cleaned off the lid.
Uh-huh.
I mean, that was covered over every night, and, that was not an excavation. I mean, that was something we did with our hands and with screwdrivers, and, it wasn't an excavation. But, again, you got to understand, my relationship with Dr. Hawaz has been very straightforward. He has denied me almost nothing in the past 2 years, has been very forthright with me, has allowed us to film even up above the King's Chamber, which is, of course, the subject of the Hoagland Tunnel. And so I didn't want to get on the wrong side of the Egyptians.
Of course not.
But that's when as they say, it hit the fan, because that's when we found out some extraordinary stuff. At that point, when we went to the inspector and said, look, we'd like you to look at this radar test. We'd like to do a comparative test somewhere where you know there's a tunnel.
Sure.
And then compare that tunnel with the tunnel we've shown you, and then we'd like you to please dig under this lid because the ground has already been disturbed. And it's 275 yards from the Sphinx, and we think we can do it with picks and shovels.
So at this point you were proposing Well, you proposed radar study first, followed by digging.
Yeah, I was asking Dr. Hawass to dig a hole into the tunnel.
Uh-huh.
Now, at that point, it all came apart. It turned out, to my horror, and I tell you, I never thought I was this naive, but apparently Dr. Shore's permit to explore had been revoked at the end of 1996. We are now in February of 1997.
Uh-huh. So you're operating on a revoked permit.
We're operating on my permit to film. Apparently the Egyptians had given me permission to go down and finish my film. And they had been told by the Shore Foundation that none of the equipment was going to be working, that we were just filming it.
Why had Shore's permit not been renewed or extended?
I don't know specifically, but there are 2 or 3 different stories. One is that all the permits were revoked because of all the trouble with Hancock and Baval and West.
Yes.
I know for a fact, because I saw it, that there was a day in which Dr. Shore was engaged in doing a little illicit digging behind the stela in front of the Sphinx, and I believe that one of the inspectors saw it, put a very quick stop to it. Again, I was there and saw it, and I don't want to categorize it either way, because you can't dig 35 feet through solid rock with a chisel, but he certainly was digging, and they certainly saw it. I don't know why they revoked his permit. I don't know why he didn't tell me they revoked his permit. But I can tell you that Garrett Griffin, my director, and I were down there in that well with all our photographic equipment, and we were illegal, and we were flabbergasted.
So at this point, it might be reasonable. Mr. Shore certainly knew his permit had been revoked.
Of course.
So, or expired, not renewed, whatever
Yes.
the case. And so it might be reasonable to presume that Dr. Shore, with you already there, was going to let you proceed as far as you could proceed before they stopped you.
Exactly.
Sure, okay.
Now, what I did subsequent to that, and it's a matter of record, was I delivered a letter to Dr. Hawass in which I gave him my word that I didn't know that we had no permission, and offered him that footage. I said, this footage will not be released, publicized, or made use of in any way by anyone without your specific written permission to do so. Mm-hmm. And I offered to give him the footage, because I've been in Egypt for 10 years, and I was appalled that this had happened, and we didn't know about it.
Right.
Now, at that point, we're sitting in a bar that night, Garrett and I, and we're putting this whole story together. And I don't know if this is the appropriate time or not to tell you this, but I mean, this was when I began to think that we had at one point a working relationship with Graham Hancock and Robert Baval, and we were using some of their footage in our original promo, in fact. Mm-hmm. And then apparently they refused to sign a secrecy pledge. And
everybody needs to know, everything at this point was extremely secret. You
Yes.
weren't making any public statements at all.
Because we had agreed not to.
Refusing all interviews.
For scientific purposes, until we knew where we were. That was my pledge to Dr. Shore.
Right.
But as far as I'm concerned, all bets were off when I found out that we were operating on my permit.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I got in trouble because I, at one point, and I think it came out on your show, I asked my friend Richard Hoagland, I told him that if we did in fact get permission to open the tunnel, I'd invite him to be my guest there.
As a matter of fact, I too was tentatively, and I remember talking to you.
Yep.
And you said, "Oh yes, we'd like to have you and Richard come over."
Absolutely. I didn't want any. I'm trying to sell a television show.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't see any need for secrecy. But in retrospect, it's 20/20 hindsight, right? I began to realize what had happened. What you should know, Art, at this point probably, is that in February, before we ever left on this ill-fated trip, we had a meeting at Fox Network. And we had been negotiating with Fox to air the show. We've been negotiating in good faith with them for about 3 months. And when we showed up at the final meeting, which was the week before we were to come to Egypt, in February, Fox presented us with a contract, a 54-page contract, which had half a dozen paragraphs in it that basically took total control of everything away from me. Took control of the script, of the content, of the subject matter, of everything. It basically made the film a work for hire and gave control to Fox. The payment that we were going to get was going to compensate Shore almost completely for all the money he'd put in. And my partners and I were going to wind up with 1/3 of half of the net profits. And as you know, in Hollywood, there ain't no net, ever. So it could have been 150% of the net profit.
It wouldn't make any difference, 0-0.
Now, at that point, I have to tell you, Art, we were not in this thing for the money. I mean, we'd never really been in it for the money, because with the kind of work that's involved here, you could make 3 films. So it wasn't like we were holding out for a better deal. I didn't want to sign the contract because the film was 90% in the can. And I didn't see any reason to allow anybody to
take editorial content.
That's right. Because I was afraid that it would wind up another Geraldo's vault, where they would not use the stuff in the pyramid, the sonic stuff, or any of that good stuff, and it would just become a treasure hunt. So I wouldn't sign the...
Call toll-free 1-800-618-8255.
And basically, sell out, I guess, my other investors. At the time, I probably should have thought a lot more about it than I did. But I just said no, and that was the end of that. And I figured, well, it's a disagreement between 2 associates.
So let's just say he allegedly made some offers to you to try to get you to go ahead with this deal.
That's right.
All right.
And I wouldn't do it because, again, there wasn't that much money in it. It wasn't that big a bonanza anyway. And we were so close to the truth that I couldn't see any reason, any justification for not keeping control of what we said.
So you said, no way, I'm not signing
this contract.
All right.
And we went in February under those circumstances. What I did not know was that Shore's permit had been canceled.
You still, at that point, didn't know?
I didn't know that. That was before we went down in the well. This occurred a week before we went over, when we made our famous descent into the well and discovered the sarcophagus.
All right.
If you want to listen to our show ad-free 24/7, access audio archives, live chat with me, and much more, you need to become a Coast Insider now.
So you're telling me your grandmother, who died a few weeks ago, came and visited you last night in your bedroom, and you're not scared?
Are extraterrestrials living among us?
I don't know if it's true or not, folks, but we're going to find out.
If you enjoy stories like these and want to learn more about the mysteries of the universe with me, become a Coast Insider now to access hundreds of our archive shows to listen anytime, anywhere. Sign up now at coasttocoastam.com/Coast Insider. That's coasttocoastam.com/Coast Insider.
Hello, Discover Card here to explain our cashback match. We match all of the cashback you earn at the end of your first year, automatically. It's that simple. Discover. Exceptionally common sense. Learn more at discover.com/match. Limitations apply.
Welcome to Coast AM's YouTube channel. I'm George Norrie. Like, share, and subscribe. Also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and coasttocoastam.com. Become a Coast Insider for ad-free access to thousands of shows you'll really enjoy.
From the Southeast Asian capital city of the Philippines, Manila, I bid you all good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as the case may be, and welcome to yet another edition, my third this week, of Coast to Coast AM. It is my honor and privilege escorting you throughout the weekend. I'm Art Bell, and this is the radio program of its genre, whether it be conspiracy theories or, well, the paranormal or the Abby-normal, and that's what I call the world news, Abby-normal, and we'll get to that here in a moment. Professor Ronald Mallett, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Art.
It's good to have you here. I should warn you, though, Professor, I've had, over now many, many years, a number of people on the subject of time travel that have said they have done time travel or have an active ready machine. And honest to God, this is not a program promo kind of deal or anything else. These people have disappeared. They're gone. Every single last one of them. They're just gone. And so I'm not saying that that they're gone in time, but it's almost like they are. They might as well be. They're the only people who have virtually disappeared. So I guess there is, I guess we'll get to that as we talk about time travel. And the first obvious question is time travel, is it really possible?
Yes, Art, it really is. And most people don't realize that. I mean, they think of time travel as being science fiction, but it is, in fact, science fact, and it has been done. It's important to realize, though, that it's based on Einstein's theories of relativity. And I would be highly suspect of any time travel developments that weren't. But those based on Einstein's theory are sound.
Now, I'm a neophyte here in a lot of ways. I thought Einstein basically said that time travel was not possible.
Oh, no. Quite the opposite. In fact, in old physics, the physics, so-called physics of Newton that we're familiar with everyday world, says that time is absolute. It doesn't change. Nothing can change it. But in Einstein's theory, particularly his so-called special theory of relativity, Einstein showed that time is affected by motion. That is to say, a clock. The faster you move a clock, the more time slows down. And this, in fact, has been demonstrated in many, many situations. And in fact, one of the most famous ones that happened recently was in 1970s, where if you have an atomic clock is the most precise timekeeping mechanism that we have. And what was done was two atomic clocks were synchronized, and one was kept stationary at the Naval Observatory, and another was put on an ordinary passenger jet. Mm-hmm. And this jet was flown around the world at close to the speed of sound. When the jet came back, they compared the two atomic clocks. And what they found was that the atomic clock, the atomic clock that was on the jet had actually slowed down compared to the clock that was stationary. This means that the clock that was on the atomic clock that was on the jet had actually slowed down because it was moving so quickly. And this
by how much, Professor?
It was only about 40 nanoseconds. In fact, it turns out that the faster you go, the more time slows down. And what this demonstrated was the principle. This means that if we were able to go sufficiently fast, and, for example, NASA is, in fact, trying to develop rocket engines that can theoretically go close to the speed of light eventually, that you would find that it wouldn't just slow down by 40 nanoseconds. You could have its time slowing down by days, hours, months, years. So the closer you go to the speed of light, the more it slows down. But what this demonstrated with the clocks on the jet was the fact that time does slow down with speed.
All right, but what I've always wanted, and I sense what you definitely want, is not a fast rocket or a fast plane, but a machine that can somehow achieve the same goal, yes?
Oh, that's right. Well, the thing is that what my interest, of course, was a time machine that could go into the past. But in a sense, even a rocket is a machine that can go into the future. I mean, one of the things that you have to realize is that if time is slowing down, that means that everyone that was on board that jet plane, their heart rate, their metabolism, these are clocks. This means that all your metabolic processes, all your physiological processes were slowing down. In other words, you were aging less. Sure. This means that the faster that you were going, the less that you aged compared to everyone else. So in a sense, you were able to go into the future compared to everyone else who was stationary. So traveling on a rocket would take you into the future. But if you wanted to have a device that was stationary, you could actually do it by using gravity. Turns out that...
Well, here's an off-the-wall question, Professor. What about pilots and aircrew who on a regularly scheduled basis traverse the Earth, make flights from the U.S. to, for example, where I am here in the Philippines. In other words, the other side of the world. And back and forth, back and forth. They're doing this all the time. Is there any collective effect on people like that?
Oh, it is, yes. The thing is that, however, the collective effect is still very, very small. I mean, since we're talking about, fractions of a second, it would not be noticeable, but it is there, in fact, and it is a cumulative effect. For example, the astronauts who were circling the Earth at very high speeds for very long periods of time,
Good point.
they are, in a sense, the first time travelers, and the cumulative effect is there. So, yes, that happens. But as I said, since the speeds, even going in a rocket, if you're going, 25,000 miles per hour, which is very, very fast, the effect is still only fractions of a second. You would have to go quite fast in order to see it in a very noticeable amount. But yes, you might say that they're time traveling every time they get into one of their jets.
Okay, the question of why you got interested in time travel, I think, is answered in your bio. You lost your dad at 10 years of age. That really began it all?
Yes, because when he died, it devastated me, and I wanted to find a way of, at the time, I didn't have any recourse except grief, and it was a little bit more than a year after that he died that my life was changed by reading. That was one of the gifts that he left me, was this thirst to read and to learn. And I came across H.G. Wells' book, The Time Machine, and that is what changed everything for me. It was sort of a turning point in my life. And what I realized, as a child, was that, let's suppose that I could build a time machine, then I could go back into the past, not only see him again, but, warn him about his death. So it actually became an obsession with me to want to build a time machine to go back into the past, to see him again.
Boy, I can understand. I really can understand that. And so that drove you ultimately to a PhD in physics, huh?
Well, yeah, not quite so quickly as it sounds. No.
Of course.
Excuse me. No, because, one of the things is that, and I mentioned this, I've written a book recently called Time Traveler that has just come out. And one of the things I do in that book is to actually tell the detail of the story. The book is actually an autobiography as well as a pop science book to try to explain to people exactly what we understand about time travel. And the road was complicated and not quite that straight. One of the things is that I didn't have anyone to guide me. And when I had this notion of building a time machine, I was astute enough even as a child to realize that since people saw me in a rather depressed state, that I better keep this notion of building a time machine a secret because they might seriously wonder what was happening to me.
And I would imagine through a great deal of your early career, it would have to have been kept secret.
That's right. And the thing that gave me courage, that it wasn't a crazy notion, was the fact that a few years after I came across H.G. Wells' book, I came across a popular science book on Einstein. And when I read the book, this was my first encounter with the great genius. I read that Einstein, in fact, said that time could be changed and it could be affected by motion. And I thought, wow, this is wonderful. This means that since time is something that can be changed, then there is a possibility that time travel is possible, and what H.G. Wells is saying could happen. And so, once again, I kept it to myself, but I wanted to learn more and more about what this Einstein said. But even though I knew he was a physicist, my father was a television repairman, and my notion was to somehow maybe use electronics as a way of doing it. So my original direction was to actually consider electrical engineering rather than physics. And so I and the other thing is that, it's funny, but physics, as it was taught at the time that I was taking it in my high school, was taught by a rather person who wasn't particularly inspired teacher, and so I didn't feel particularly inspired to go into physics. That may sound really surprising, but that was so. However, I had some wonderful math teachers, and so the thing is that I became enthralled with mathematics, and it was that way that I began to understand more and more about his ideas. But I was a poor family, so college was not something that was automatically in my future, and I knew that if I was going to get to college at all, I was going to have to do it in an indirect way, which I did by going into the service, the Air Force in particular. And so that, as I said, there's much more to the story than that, but that was some of it. But eventually, I was led to the road to physics and realized that was the only way that I was going to be able to do this. And once again, I learned more and more about Einstein's theories, and the more I learned, the more I realized that not only time travel was possible, but the possibility of building a time machine was there. But how to do that?
Now, let me stop you there. And
Sure.
I do understand the notion of speed and time.
Right.
I've got that. But then what I don't understand is how a machine could even conceivably be possible. Because, of course, with a machine, you don't have the kind of motion we're talking about, whether it be a jet aircraft or something even close to the speed of light. You don't have any of that. All you've got is a machine. So,
Right.
So obviously there's something very much that I don't understand, and I'm sitting here looking at your graphic right now on the Coast website. So could you explain to me sort of basically, maybe so that the majority of us can understand, without the motion that we're talking about, how can you possibly imagine a machine that would accomplish it?
Right. Very, very good point. And to do that, you have to go to Einstein's second theory. What most people don't realize, when they hear of Einstein's theory of relativity, they think of it as one theory. Einstein had actually developed two theories. The first theory, as you were pointing out, actually has to do with speed and time. That's the special theory of relativity. His second theory was called the general theory of relativity, and it has to do with gravity. And in that theory, Einstein said that gravity can slow down time. In other words, the stronger you have a gravitational field, the more time can slow down. Now, let me use the example of the atomic clocks again. Let's suppose that you take two atomic clocks. If you're at the surface of the Earth, because you're at the surface of the Earth and you're closer to the center of the Earth, gravity is stronger there than if you're at the top of a mountain. If you're at the top of the mountain, you're farther from the center of the Earth, and gravity is weaker at the top of the mountain, okay?
Right.
So
Sure.
if you take two atomic clocks, one at sea level and one at the top of a mountain, what has been found is that the clock at sea level runs slower than one at the top of the mountain. That means that, you see? Right.
Yes, of course I do. So the gravitational influence on the one close to sea level is indeed changing time.
Exactly. And in fact, this has extremely important practical consequences because the GPS satellites, the clocks that are on board the satellites, are so far away from the center of the Earth that they are running at a different rate than the clocks on the surface of the Earth. So computer signals actually have to be sent to, keep them synchronized. So this aspect of Einstein's theory actually has everyday consequences for us. Now, here we come back to the notion of a machine. Now, if you're in a gravitational field, that means that if you can somehow make a stronger gravitational field locally, that will slow time down without motion. You just need to make gravity stronger. The question is how can you do that? Well, one way of doing it would be to go to a place where gravity is much stronger than it is here on the surface of the Earth. By going to another planet, for example, like Jupiter, where gravity is much greater, clocks would slow down more. The extreme case of a gravitating body that would slow time down would be a black hole. A black hole is, just to remind you, is a star that has collapsed to a point where all the light that tries to come from the star, since the gravity is so strong as the star collapses, all of the light that tries to leave the star gets pulled back to the star because gravity is pulling it back. And
Correct.
if you're standing outside, since all the light is being pulled back to the star, you see nothing. That's what you mean by a black hole. If you can't see anything, then there's a black hole there. Now, it turns out that as I pointed out, since gravity can slow time down, if you were to take a clock or yourself close to a black hole, time would slow down so much that you could be near the black hole for, let's say, just a few hours, but yet hundreds of years could be passing everywhere else. So if you didn't go too close to the black hole, if you got near it but didn't go inside of it, you could come back away from the black hole and find out that you had only aged maybe hours, a few hours, but yet 100 years had passed everywhere else.
Is that survivable?
It's survivable if you don't cross the
Event horizon.
Event horizon, exactly. If you don't cross the region where the light signals are being pulled back, then yes, you can do it. But if you pass the region where the light signals are being pulled back, then forget it. There's no way that you can get out of the black hole. So in a sense, a black hole could be used as a time machine, but you have to get to a black hole in order to do that. The notion is that it's possible to do it here on the Earth. And what I have found is that, once again, based on Einstein's theory, that you can manipulate gravity locally. And that's where light comes into this picture. It turns out that not only in Newton's theory, classical theory, light does not have a gravitational effect. However, in Einstein's theory, not only does matter have a gravitational effect, but light itself can create gravity. This means that light can slow time down.
Okay, that's a new one on me. I thought that gravity was only a function of mass. Is that not correct? Is it correct?
That is correct. That is correct, but that's only half the story, and that's usually all that one finds when one's reading, most standard books. But according to Einstein's theory, not only can mass, but light itself can create gravity. Okay, and as I said, that this is not all that well known, and of course in Newton's theory, only matter can create gravity. So you might say the key to my discovery is that aspect of Einstein's theory, that light can create gravity. So the light can affect time. That's
light
one of the
can. All right, hold it right there, Professor. We're at a break point, so just relax for a few minutes. Isn't that fascinating? Light can create gravity. Now, I wonder how you would set about proving that point. Certainly, there's a lot of light that comes from our stars, so some sort of measurement with regard to the sun seems to me ought to prove it. Maybe. I'm Art Bell. This is Coast to Coast, AM on Time Travel. Professor Ronald Mallett is my guest. The subject, my favorite, time travel. Listen, if you go to the website, coasttocoastam.com, you'll see a graphic. This graphic is really fascinating, particularly based on what the professor just said, that light can affect time. If that's true, then reading the graphic, at the top of the graphic it says you will see a loop, and inside the loop there's a light beam. Time is warped into a loop, it says. Then down below that, what was time outside of the circle of light is now space, so he can walk, meaning our time traveler, he can walk into our past. And then down at the bottom, if he walks out of the loop, he may see himself waiting to go in. That's kind of eerie stuff. So we are talking about, in fact, time travel, courtesy of light. This is backed by Einstein's general theory of relativity. So in a moment, we'll get back to Professor Ronald Mallett. Go to the graphic and take a look. I'm Art Bell. Well, all right, Professor. Let's see. Where were we? We were talking about light, and you were saying that light can affect time. Is there any way to prove that?
Right. Well, there is, in fact, and this is one of the things that I mentioned in my book, Time Traveler, is the fact that you can, because of the fact that since light has energy, and remember the famous equals MC square? That means that you can consider that if light has energy, it has almost like a mass sort of equivalent, and since mass can creates gravity, then the energy of light, even though light doesn't have mass, it can create gravity too. And you could do, if you have a strong enough light beam, you could actually show that time is slowing down. And what my idea is to actually not use to use a light beam, but not just simply have it moving in a single direction, but to create a circulating light beam. And you might say, how do you create a circulating light beam, and what does this do? You can actually create it a number of different ways. You could actually set up a series of mirrors and have a light beam. If you think of a square, say, and you have 4 mirrors at each corner of the square,
Right.
then you could actually have a light beam coming from one of the mirrors, hitting each mirror at each corner and going around the square. That would create a circulating beam of light. And what this light does is, one of the things that we haven't talked about is what gravity is in Einstein's theory. We think of gravity as being something that is sort of a pull of one object on another. In other words, the sun pulls on the Earth, or the Earth pulls on us. But what you have to remember in Einstein's theory is that that pull of gravity is actually something of an illusion. That in Einstein's theory, gravity is actually a bending of space. That's something we can't see. Now, this is going to take a little bit of explanation for me to make clear what I mean by a bending of space. Let's use an example of, let's say, something like a trampoline. Let's say you have a rubber sheet, a taut rubber sheet.
Right.
And suppose that you take a bowling ball and you put it on that rubber sheet. Now, think of the rubber sheet as representing empty space. And think of this bowling ball that you're going to put on it as representing something like the sun. Now, if you put the bowling ball on the rubber sheet, it's going to cause the rubber sheet to bend, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Now, suppose that you took a little marble and you were to set it on the rubber sheet somewhere, some point away from the bowling ball. What's going to happen?
It's going to run right down toward the bowling ball.
Exactly. Now, suppose that the rubber sheet that's there, suppose it's transparent. So it's there, but you can't see it anymore, all right?
Right, right.
So all you can see now is the bowling ball and the marble. So what would you think then when you have the marble there as it's rolling towards the bowling ball? You would think that somehow the bowling ball is pulling on the marble because you can't see the rubber sheet anymore, right?
You certainly would, yes.
Exactly. Well, that is the basis of Einstein's great discovery about gravity. What he said is that the sun is curving the empty space around it.
I just got it.
Okay? And
Yes.
the Earth is just simply like that marble that is moving around, the curvature that's created. And it looks to us like it's a pull of the sun on the Earth, but it isn't. It's actually the sun bending the empty space around it, and the Earth is just moving in that bent space.
Got it. You're actually the first person who's been able to explain that to me in a way I can understand. I'm sure a lot of the audience just got it as well. Huh.
Thank you. But that's the point. The thing is that what matter can do is actually bend space. And light can do the same thing. Light can actually cause space to bend, okay? Now, in Einstein's theory, not only does space get affected, but time gets affected by matter. Now, the bending of time, space and time in Einstein's theory are linked to each other. In other words, whatever you do to space, it affects time. Now, you might say, how does this bending of time look? Well, this bending of time looks to us like what we call the slowing down of a clock. In other words, the way in which we see the bending of time is that a clock slows down. So whenever I was talking about here on the Earth is actually curving the space around it. And we here on the Earth, even though we can't see it, that's what keeps us to the surface of the Earth.
More like the marbles.
Right, exactly. And the bending of time that results from that bending of space is the slowing down of the atomic clock. Now, coming once again back to light will also cause space to become bent. But if you have a circulating light beam, like this bouncing of light around the mirrors I was telling you about,
Yes,
this
sir.
will actually cause a twisting of space. Now, how can you imagine what the twisting of space would look like? Well, imagine that you have a cup of coffee sitting in front of you, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And think of the coffee in your cup as being empty space. And think of your spoon. Suppose you take your spoon and think of your spoon as being like the circulating light beam, this light beam that's going around from mirror to mirror, okay? Now, if you take your spoon and stir your coffee, what happens to your coffee? Your coffee starts swirling around, right, creating a little vortex. That's what the circulating light beam will do. The circulating light beam will actually cause a stirring of empty space. In other words, sort of a vortex of space. It's like swirling of water down the drain of your sink. But you can't see it. So you might say, well, if I can't see it, how do I know it's there? Well, in the case of the coffee, if you put a little sugar cube into the coffee, all right, as the coffee's swirling around, it'll move the sugar cube around, right?
Yes, of course.
In the case of the empty space, what I have proposed is that if you take a little particle that's called a neutron, okay, this is a subatomic particle. It's part of the atom. And if you stick it in the empty space, it turns out that this neutron will actually get twisted around in the empty space. So you'll be able to see that the space is being twisted by looking at what happens to the neutron, a neutron, if you put it in the space as the circulating light is going around.
So you would actually be able to see the motion that you were desiring.
Exactly. Now, once again, remember what I said about space and time being linked in Einstein's theory. Whatever happens to space happens to time. And what my calculations showed, once again, anchored in Einstein's theory, is that not only does space get twisted, but eventually, if you cause the twisting to be strong enough, time will get twisted into a loop as well. Now, what does this mean? Unconsciously, all of us are moving along a timeline, a straight line from the past to the present to the future. In other words, to give you an example, suppose that you took a piece of paper and you put a straight line on the piece of paper. And on the line, this line is going to represent time.
Right.
And at the bottom of the line, you're going to put yesterday, the past. At the middle of the line, you're going to put today, the present. And at the top of the line, you're going to put the future, tomorrow, okay?
Right.
All of us in our lives move along this timeline from yesterday to today to tomorrow. Now, imagine that you took this piece of paper with a line on it, and you curved it into a circle, to a loop, and you connected the top part of the line with the bottom of the line, okay?
Right.
Now, you're on this loop. You can move from the past along the line to the present. You can continue along the line to the future. But remember now, you've taken this straight line and made it into a circle. That means you can actually move along this line from the future back to the past.
Got it.
So by twisting space into a loop, you can actually travel back into the past. And that's the core of my discovery, that two parts of my discovery, that circulating light will cause twisting of space and ultimately a twisting of time. And along that twist of time, you could go back into the past.
Wow. All right, in your graphic, that's really fascinating. In your graphic, you suggest that you might well, as you walk out of this, see yourself waiting to go in. Now, wouldn't that be a classic immediate paradox?
It would appear, but it isn't. One of the things that you have to realize is that once you turn the device on, you've created new conditions. And this is what allows you to go back to the past, is the fact that you're doing this. And one of the ways, but it's complicated in the sense that you now have a new situation that you've created. And
right. Oh, you have a new situation is correct. So I said paradox. Now, what I'm wondering is, it seems impossible to us that two of us could exist in the same space at the same time, and it's almost as though one of the two would have to cease to exist, or you suggest no. So what would the condition be as you walked out? Would you see each other, or would that be impossible, even though you're both there?
No, you would see each other.
You would see each other.
Right, and you have to realize that you're not the same. One is the older version of you. You are not identical, okay? You're actually seeing... So number one, you're not the same. person. You're actually a different person. You're an older person. So the person that you would be seeing coming out of the machine would be an older version of yourself. And you would be seeing, as you were coming out of the machine, a younger version of yourself. And you're not occupying the same space. You're actually at the same time, but you're actually occupying two different, regions of space. The other thing is that there's another aspect to this, because as you clearly pointed out, this seems like this is going to lead to paradoxes. And you have to realize that aspect of the theory, you have to consider another important theory of physics to consider what might happen in that particular case. And this other theory is as strange in itself as relativity is, and it's the other pillar of 20th century physics, and it's called quantum theory. And it's quantum theory that tells us how this apparent paradox associated with time travel in the past could be resolved. And it leads to an idea that is as weird as time travel. It's called the notion of parallel universes. But once again, what's important to realize is that this is anchored in quantum theory. So in quantum theory, even though the name theory is there, quantum theory is the basis that we can understand everything from the atom to cell phones. In other words, our cell phones wouldn't work if there wasn't quantum theory. So it tells us exactly how matter operates. Now, the thing is that what quantum theory tells us also is that the world at the atomic level operates in a way that we're not used to seeing on everyday life. Things can change their identities. Particles can merge into each other. Things that can happen that we don't see on an everyday level. And also what quantum theory tells us is that, we're used to the notion that if we toss an object across the room, we can exactly tell where it's going to go when we toss it across the room. In quantum theory, the best that we could do is to say where it might go. We can't talk about how things will exactly happen. We can only talk about what will probably happen next.
Right.
And to give you a very specific example of what quantum theory would imply if you apply it to everyday life, and this is anchored in a theory that was developed by a man named Hugh Everett, who was a physicist who applied quantum theory to the entire universe. Suppose that at lunch tomorrow, you were trying to make up your mind to have a fish sandwich or a cheeseburger. Okay. Now, at the very moment that you made the decision, that you decided to choose one, there is a split in the universe. There are two separate universes that would diverge from each other. There would be an Art Bell that would be in a universe that has chosen the fish sandwich, but there would also be an Art Bell in a whole new universe that has the cheeseburger. They would not know of each other. They would be two separate paths, two parallel different universes, all self-contained. And this would happen for every single decision that you and everyone makes. There would be a split in the universe at that particular point. And it doesn't have to do with human beings. This could happen even for an electron. In other words, if an electron has a possibility of going in one direction or another, then it chooses one path in one universe and it chooses the other path in a separate universe. That's the basis of what's known as parallel universe theory.
That suggests an absolute unlimited number of universes, right?
Absolutely, exactly. For every possible alternative, there is a separate universe, and all of these universes are happening in different spaces. The space is technically called a superspace, where all these universes are happening. So there can be an unlimited number of them because they're not crowding each other. Now, the thing is that how does this apply to time travel? Well, and this was actually studied by a physicist at Oxford University, David Deutsch, looking at how quantum theory would affect these paradoxes. Suppose that you went back into the past. As soon as you arrived in the past, there would be a split in the universe. There would be two universes. You, for example, would find yourself emerging in a universe in which you could actually see yourself going into the machine. But there would be another universe in which you don't see that. Okay, so there are actually two separate universes. Now, the new universe, in other words, this gets around the so-called notion of the grandfather paradox, where you go back and
kill your grandfather.
Kill your grandfather, or the way that I like to think of it, the more milder form is you go back and prevent your grandfather from getting married, for example.
There you go.
You know, and if he doesn't get married, then he doesn't have your father or mother, and they don't have you, so, you shouldn't be around.
That's
but
right.
if you go back into the past, what the parallel universe theory says is that as soon as you go back into the would be the universe in which you, in fact, would be in the universe where you would have to see your grandfather, and you could prevent his marriage. You would now find yourself in a very strange universe in which you were never born, but you were there. But the other universe, you would not have you emerging and affecting your grandfather. And that universe does give rise to you. The notion here is that you can go back into the past and change the past, but the past you change is not the past that you came from.
The past you change is not the past you came from.
That's right.
So from that moment of change forward, everything would be different.
That's right. There would be another universe that led to the normal path that you came from. Okay. In other words, that's the reason why there wouldn't be a paradox, because there would be a universe that in which you didn't affect your grandfather, and he did get married. In fact, he doesn't even encounter you, and things go normally. And that's the universe that you came from. But as soon as you entered the time machine and came back into the past, you ended up in a different universe. And that's the universe that you can affect. So you can go back into the past and change things, but the things you're changing are in a new universe.
There's this butterfly effect thing. Now, if you create a change, you're in another universe in which events unfold in a possibly a completely different way. Now, maybe the change that you make has some large effect on the unfolding of events in this new universe, or maybe it does not. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, it's more likely that it will. I mean, if you emerge and you change things, it's likely that the ripple effect is going to have very, very significant changes in that new universe.
Really?
Yes. Because, every little thing that you do it can lead to a change that it can be extremely dramatic.
My God, we're already at another break point. This time is just flying by. All right, Professor, hold tight. Professor Ronald Mallett is my guest, and if you want to look at a model of a time machine, we've got it on coasttocoastam.com right now. I suggest you take a very good look as you listen to what the professor is saying, because he might have it. From Manila in the Philippines, I'm Art Bell. I'm not sure I believe in time either as a straight, unbendable, unchangeable line that simply goes from the past to the present that we chug along in toward the future. I don't believe it's that single line. I really do think the professor is right, Professor Ronald Mallett, that it can be modified from a straight line to essentially a circle that would allow travel, easy travel from the future into the past, zipping past the present, again into the future, as you wish to do, traveling probably in either direction. And I wonder what would control the direction of the travel. That would in itself is an interesting. There's a million interesting questions here. Professor Ronald Mallett, my guest. Time travel is the subject. We'll be right back. Once again, Professor Ronald Mallett. Professor, if you could travel into the past, could you... well, here's a question from a listener. Josie in Toledo, Ohio says, Art, if you could go back in time and and change something and then end up in a different universe, then doesn't that defeat the purpose of going back in time, trying to change something in the first place? Well, I would answer that as no, because you're in a different universe then where things unfold in a very different way. And now how that would relate, for example, to your father, let's say you went back in time, Professor, and you did something that prevented his death. Could you stay then in that timeline, in that universe, and continue, I don't know, wait a minute, let me think about this, and continue to be with your father through what would be then his normal extended lifetime?
Yes, it would just be that it would be a weird sort of thing because, in a sense, you would be right. You would be exactly. You would be older, and you would actually have a younger version of yourself in that universe. You would have sacrificed yourself in your old universe because you would essentially no longer be a participant there. And that would be the sacrifice that you would have to make. In other words, I would now be in a universe in which my father would continue to live. It would be strange because he would be a younger man than himself. And he would live normally, and the version of me, the younger version of me in that universe would live out a different life. I might act as an older uncle for him or something like that, or, but a godfather or something. But the thing is that I would be able to see how his life would have evolved if things had been changed.
But from our point of view,
sacrifice.
Yes, but from our point of view, you would disappear.
That's right. You would be gone forever from the time stream that you had been in, and you would that would be it. People would say, well, he's gone. So, but once again, so you in a sense, for example, if I were able to prevent the assassination of Martin Luther King, I could do it in another universe, and that would, but I would have to sacrifice myself in my original universe.
I've got it. All right. I once had a guest, an interesting young guy, who was using a laser and found that he could take things like a little nut or a bolt and cause them to temporarily disappear and then reappear. He was using, I can't recall exactly what it was, a laser. He actually got in trouble for stealing some very large transformers, and so he was using magnetics and a laser, which is light in some manner, and I can't recall exactly what it was. He's one of those that is now gone. Now, I'm not saying that he's traveled in time, but perhaps he has. And is it possible, in your view, Professor, that there are some people, aside from yourself, that have stumbled into exactly what you're talking about here and have simply gone to another time? No.
The thing is that you have to remember that there's a number of things that are involved here. Number one is the fact that I'm not exactly sure what this person did. Laser light is just like light, but it's only much more focused. It's much more intense, and it has properties that ordinary light from a light bulb doesn't share. But one of the things that it can't do is just simply make things disappear, at least not so far as I know in the normal laws of physics. It can be used to push things around, and it can be used to create, gravitational fields. But one of the other things you have to realize, and this is one of those things that people sometimes ask, are there time travelers among us? And
the obvious question, if time travel is to ever be possible, then where are the time travelers? Somebody famous said that, right?
Exactly. That's a very famous question, in fact, one that was asked by Stephen Hawking. The thing that you have to realize is with real time travel, it requires a mechanism. Then if you turn, for example, this sort of system that I was talking about, the circulating light beam, suppose I turned it on today.
Yes.
And I left it on for, let's say, 10 years. Then continuously, then someone could send information back from 10 years from now, back 5 years, all the way back to the time the machine was turned on, but they can't go back earlier than that particular point. So, for example, and this makes sense, if you think of your radio, you don't get something from your radio before you turn it on, okay? You can't have a physical effect occurring before its cause is there.
In other words, there will not be time travelers until time travel is invented.
Exactly. So that's the answer to that question. The answer to that question is that the reason why we have not been inundated with time travelers is that the first time machine has not, in fact, been invented.
To the best of our knowledge.
To the best of our knowledge, exactly. The thing is that it's possible that it has been developed in another world. That's distinctly a possibility. I believe that life is out there in other civilizations. That's distinct from the notion that they may have visited us.
But, Professor, if you had a time machine, if you went back to prior to your father's death, you, just kind of like early in your career, you couldn't really talk about it, could you?
Well, you mean if I went back to, oh, yes. You mean, well, that's an interesting point. What would I do? I mean, once I was there, what issues? I mean, that brings up a whole host of other things that, how much would I want to become involved in that world once I got there? That's something that I would have to decide, after really careful consideration, because there are these ethical questions about...
Could you make a choice, Professor? Could you stay in the past all of your life there, or could you also, and also could you choose to return? Could you return?
No. Once you are in that new universe, you cannot return to the old universe. You are in that universe forever. And if you use the machine again, you would end up in a new universe. So in a sense, you would be parallel universe hopping as well as time traveling. Now, I have to say that, remember, you've got this notion of parallel universes is just one possible alternative that's based in the physics of quantum mechanics. There are other possibilities that one has to consider as far as time travel is concerned, because, you have to realize that all that we really have for ourselves is the present moment, the moment that we're in. Future is not something that has happened. So suppose that you receive some sort of information from somewhere today. Let's say that the information said, Art, I don't think it's going to be a good idea for you to take a drive tomorrow. That's all the information you got, okay?
Right.
Now, you would have to ask yourself, wait a minute, now, is this a message from someone, who knows something that I don't know about, what's going to happen to my car? In other words, someone who's just, knows that someone tampered with it? Or is this information coming from the future in which someone knows that something's going to happen to me if I take that drive? Or is someone, playing a joke on me? So there's a fundamental uncertainty that you have in that information that you receive.
Yes.
Where is it coming from? Now, you have to make a decision and act on it or not act on it. That's always going to be confronting people when time travel occurs. When they get the information, they're going to have to decide, is this information from my universe or parallel universe?
Mm-hmm. But you're telling me it's a one-way ticket.
That's right.
Okay, a one-way ticket. So that in itself would create a very, very difficult decision, Professor. Let's say that you built the machine that you have pictured here, that you actually managed to build it. How much hesitation would you have in in going in and taking a shot?
None.
None?
None. Excuse me.
That's quite all right.
No, the thing is that I would have no hesitation at all, because of the thing, it's, there's this excitement about knowing more, of exploring the unknown. And, I am one of these people, I'm a Star Trek fan, and this notion of boldly going where no one has gone before would be irresistible. I mean, I would want to know what it would be like to time travel. So I would have no hesitation to do it.
Well, since it's a one-shot deal, of course, you would take back with you the knowledge to build another machine, I suppose, if you had to, if the technology was available at whatever time you chose. Well, a million questions. What would you choose? If you had the machine, you could go to the future, you could go to the past, but it's a one-way ticket, basically. Where would you go? Have you made that decision?
No, I mean, I haven't. I mean, for me, right at this particular point, it's just to see that my equations would in fact lead to these effects and to actually do it. It's
Right.
the notion of the sweetness of the technology of knowing, that we have understood some really fundamental new aspect about the physical world. That's the thing that would motivate me to do it. This question of what to do with it is actually a very important ethical consideration because, the notion of time travel leads to the notion of time travel abuses. Any new technology has that associated with it, and the question is that if you have this new technology, don't you have to worry about how it might be abused? And
No doubt. What abuses do you imagine?
Well, I mean, imagine what time travel would be like in the hands of terrorists. I mean, you see what I'm getting at?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the thing is that one has to be careful about that sort of thing. And so I believe that once the technology is developed, it's like any technology, it has to be regulated. That doesn't mean that the technology should be prevented, because also there's the positive aspect of the technology. In other words, time travel could be used as an early warning device. It could tell us of disasters, preventing, catastrophes. So the thing is that like any other technology, it's going to require regulation. And there will have to be sort of a time travel commission that would oversee the ethics of using the machine, the considerations that would be involved, and of monitoring possible abuses. One of my favorite movies is called Time Cop, and the title of the movie is doesn't do justice to the content. I thought that the movie was actually quite good with Claude Van Damme, but the notion was that they had a time regulation commission that essentially monitored abuses in time travel, and that is something that will eventually have to happen.
Well, but according to if I've been listening correctly, not much that you would go back and do would affect the present universe's timeline, would it?
Well, see, that's what I was getting at. In other words, if you think of time travel and think of the notion of that all you have is the present moment, then that means you really can have the possibility of affecting the future. Now, it sounds weird in the sense that, what happened to that future out there? Did it just simply disappear? Perhaps. In other words, there may not be a parallel universe. You may, in fact, since all you're dealing with is here and now, you may, in fact, be changing and creating a whole new future. And there is no other future except for the future that you have evolved from this particular point. Not a parallel one, but a new one.
So it all depends on whether this parallel universe theory is correct or not.
Exactly. And that's something that we won't know until we begin time traveling.
Well, there wouldn't be any danger in time travel as long as we've got infinite parallel universes. But if time travel would only allow us to tamper with what we're living in now, then all of those ethical questions would be gigantic.
Exactly. And the thing that you have to realize is that, see, one of the aspects of Einstein's theory is that we think we are all in sync and in the same, marching along at the same time stream, because we're all moving at about the same speed, and we all find ourselves in about a gravitational field that's about the same strength. But as soon as we start moving very, very quickly or find ourselves in gravitational fields that are very different, our time stream separates from everyone else. So we are conscious of what a future would have been like. But once we arrive at a particular point in the past, that past becomes our present. And for everyone else, there's no future that has happened yet. We are the only one who knew about a potential future that could have happened. And so we could change. There's a possibility that we really could change.
Professor, how much money would you need to construct what you have pictured for us here? How much money would that take?
I'm not sure. The thing is that what we're doing is in stages. I'm a theoretical physicist, by the way, and I developed the basic equations, and I'm working with a collaborator who's an experimental physicist. He's an expert in lasers. And in physics, there is this very, very important difference between theoretical and experimental physics.
Yes, of course.
Right. You know, in other words, Einstein created equals mc squared, but he did not build the atomic bomb based on his equation. Okay, that was done by other physicists and experimenters largely. And the same thing is the case here. I've developed the basic equations, but I have an experimental collaborator who's an expert in lasers who's working with me to put my notion into a design for.
So you're telling me he has actually begun experimental work based on your equations?
No. The thing is that he's begun design. What is holding us up is funding. That's the other thing that the public doesn't realize is that this is.
Well, that's why I asked about money.
Exactly. We don't know how much. To get started, what we need to actually, one of the things we have to do is to show that the circulating light is going to cause a twisting of space. If we don't see that, then there's no point in going on. That's going to cost at least $250,000 to begin. Specific.
That's not okay. Well, that's not much. And if you $250,000, if you can show that, then the rest of it is probably going to work. Is that fair?
Exactly. That's precisely it. Because the space twisting is what drives time twisting, but it requires more energy. But first, you have to see the space twisting. That's the precursor. That would tell you that it will. It's the basic.
Professor, how much energy do you imagine this would take? Because when I look at this, it doesn't look like it would take the kind of energy that most theoretical physicists talk about, and I've interviewed a number of them on the subject of time travel, and a lot of them say, yes, we think it's possible, but it would take more energy than we're really capable of producing right now on Earth, period.
Well, the thing is that this would require, the space twisting part doesn't require as much energy. The equations show that two things have to happen. You need intensity, and you also have to talk about how small the region of space is that you're dealing with. The smaller the region of space, the less energy you need. That's why in what we're doing, we're talking about information in subatomic particles. If you talk about sufficiently small region of space, then not as much energy is going to be needed. If you talk about trying to do it with human beings, an enormous amount of energy is going to be needed.
All right, no, let's back up and talk about something as small as a nut or a bolt or something small.
Right. Probably then we would need, the estimate, trillions of watts of energy now. You might say that's power. You might say, wait a minute, that's huge. But it turns out that there are lasers that have energies that are like
right
the
on
energy
up
in
there.
the sun.
Professor, hold on. We're at another break point. We'll be right back. I'm Art Bell. My guest is Professor Ron Mallett. He is a theoretical physicist, and he thinks he may well be on to what it would take to build a time machine. He's actually got another physicist who is prepared to begin work on the machine itself. This really is something, and if you've been listening carefully, it really, really sounds possible to me. This is very, very exciting stuff. All my life, I guess I've been looking towards something like this. Okay, well, listen, we're so short on time, we're not going to be able to proceed with this. But again, it kind of brings up another point. That is, Professor, that we cannot have absolute knowledge that somebody else has not come up with a practical means to move in time. It may have been done, and we would not have knowledge of it. Correct?
Well, yeah, but the thing is that once again, I think it's important to realize that if they did, it would have to be something that one of the reasons why I take what I'm doing seriously, as well as my colleagues, is based on Einstein's theory of relativity. And I think that if it has been done, it would have to have been done on that basis. And, of course, it's possible that it could have been done somewhere. But the question is that, as a scientist, I would like to see the evidence of it having happened.
Of course. Anybody who was fascinated with tonight's program should immediately go out and buy your book, Time Traveler. Professor, I just cannot thank you enough for finally being here with me tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Art. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
What a pleasure it's been. Good night, my friend.
Well, good night to you.
If you want to listen to our show ad-free, 24/7, access audio archives, live chat with me, and much more, you need to become a Coast Insider now.
So you're telling me your grandmother, who died a few weeks ago, came and visited you last night in your bedroom, and you're not scared?
Are extraterrestrials living among us?
I don't know if it's true or not, folks, but we're going to find out.
If you enjoy stories like these and want to learn more about the mysteries of the universe with me, become a Coast Insider now to access hundreds of our archive shows to listen anytime, anywhere. Sign up now at coasttocoastam.com/Coast Insider. That's coasttocoastam.com/Coast Insider.
While Kentucky was still trying to master bourbon, in Ireland, Bushmills had already mastered whiskey. Bushmills, the original whiskey, born 1608.
Welcome to Coast AM's YouTube channel. I'm George Norrie. Like, share, and subscribe. Also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and coasttocoastam.com. Become a Coast Insider for ad-free access to thousands of shows you'll really enjoy. In a moment, we're going to talk about black holes, time travel. Marshall Barnes with us. I'll tell you about his books next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Let me tell you a little bit about Marshall Barnes. He's a noted author, researcher, developmental engineer, and advanced concept science and technology. Marshall has a long history in the entertainment, technology, production, and video industry that is only matched by his achievements in science and innovation, which includes breakthroughs in optical invisibility research, advanced propulsion, consciousness. He is perhaps best known for his world-class research into time travel science and technology, which we're going to get into in a big way with him. A couple of his books include Paradox Lost and Black Holes and Time Tunnels. Marshall, welcome to the show. Good to have you back. Years. You were on with Art Bell years ago.
Yes, I was.
Well, welcome. How are you?
I'm wonderful.
I was hooked on time travel ever since that 1960 movie, The Time Machine, and I just loved it. But are we any closer to real time travel?
Yes, because we're finally giving up a lot of the distractions that have plagued the research all these years. For example, relativity theory, whether it's special or general, there are no time travel solutions that matter, that come from relativity at all. Those are dead ends. And if you listen to a lot of physicists who will talk about time travel, they'll talk about Einstein, or they're talking about black holes. Those are dead ends. And in fact, I'm not really going to talk about black holes tonight at all, because I'll tell you why. The closest black hole, 1,600 light years away.
It's a long way.
You travel for 1,600 years. No one's doing that. It would take like a warp drive. And if you have a warp drive, why do you need to go to a black hole for time travel? So, we're looking at the solutions that make sense, the areas that make sense, and that can be found at the confluence of quantum mechanics, information theory, and temporal physics.
Is it going to be technology, Marshall, that gets us into time travel?
Absolutely. We're working on it now. I mean, this isn't theoretical anymore. I had a double-blind peer-reviewed paper published that established the quantum mechanical basis for time travel. And that idea was predicted by Neil Turok from the Perimeter Institute over in Canada when he was on the BBC show Horizon. And that was significant because he turned his back on the idea that, you could find a solution in general relativity or something like that. He says, no. It's going to come from quantum mechanics. We don't know how yet, but that's where it's coming from. And that's exactly what's happening.
When we get to time travel, we'll be able to go into the future and the past? Maybe both?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I'll tell you why. Most people that I know that are interested in time travel want to go to the past. And they want to go to the past because they don't believe in the future.
Mm-hmm.
They think the future is going to be bad news. And in fact, Elon Musk is one of those people that is afraid of, what could happen in the future. AI taking over, World War III, some kind of new plague or whatever. I mean, just think, if you had time travel and go, wow, I'm going to go to the future. I'm going to go to 2020. And guess what? You land in the middle of a COVID pandemic.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Well, I hope we're around in 2070, 3,000, 3,500. But I guess if you go back in the past, how many people would try to change events? And if they do, what kind of ramifications would that have on us now?
Now, that's a very important question, okay? And it's important because it points out a major fallacy in what people think about time travel and how it works. If you go to the past, you're ending up in a new parallel universe copy of an era that already took place.
Aha.
You're not in the linear past. In fact, there's a technical term for it. It's called discontinuous. So you have a discontinuous connection, which means you can't do anything in that past that's going to affect like what's already happened. It's impossible.
So I can't go back into our linear history and save Jesus from the cross. I can't do that.
No.
Okay.
Right.
But in a parallel universe, you might be able to do that, but it won't have any bearing on us.
Exactly. And I want to be very specific on that, too, because I'm glad you phrased it that way. It's not just a parallel universe. The action of going back in time creates it. It's automatic. It's not like you have to find one or whatever. If you have the technology to be able to try to affect the past, it automatically creates a new parallel universe copy. And that we found that out from retrocausality experiments, which physicists believed were changing the path of a particle. But in fact, what we actually were able to show through physical experiments, not computer simulation, that you're actually changing the present and creating a new parallel universe in which those changes that you did, whatever they might be, are taking place.
Now, Marshall, if we go into the future and we go into, let's say, a parallel universe of the future of us, and we somehow come back here to this time, what if we're able to say in the year 4000, there's a holocaust of it's the worst nuclear war this planet's ever seen. You folks better do something about that. Would they be able to come back and tell us that so we might be able to fix it before it happens?
That gets kind of tricky. And I'll tell you why I'm viewing it that way.
Okay.
Because I'll tell you the truth, I do not work that much on trying to go to the future. So I don't even consider those kind of things. One of the things about going to the future is that you can use relativity theory to do it. It requires a space program. I mean, you've got to travel for a long time at a very high velocity in order to pull it off. But, it's very problematic. But that's what you have to do to go to the future. We really do not look at doing that at all. We're looking at going to the distant past by about 12,000 years. And what we want to do is reestablish a civilization back then so that we move like all of our toys and tools from the 21st century back to that time period and start over and basically create a new world. I mean, Elon Musk talks about going to Mars and starting over there. It'll be a lot easier to do it in the past on a parallel universe Earth. We already have everything. There's food, there's water, there's everything you need.
That's right. You wrote an open letter to Elon Musk. Tell us what it was all about.
Well, it was all about, it was interesting because I actually found someone named Matt Plantz, who on YouTube said, "Dear Mr. Musk, instead of working on going to Mars and all this other stuff, why don't you work on a time travel so we can go back to the 80s? And it was prompted by Eddie Money's song, "I Want to Go Back,"
Okay.
So what I did was, that gave me the idea, and I wrote an open letter to Elon, and I said, we all have these feelings of nostalgia for the past, but here's the deal. Everything that you're afraid of, the solution for it is going back in time. It's not going to Mars. It's not doing any of these other things he spends money on. It's figuring out how to solve what's left of the time travel question. Because it's being worked on. We're almost done. We almost have one-way time travel worked out right now.
This is exciting.
Right. So the thing is if we can do or do it both ways, go back and forth. Then you could go to the past and you could mine and you can get like all kinds of rich minerals and things of that nature. And then you can just sell them. You don't have to sell them here. I even mentioned in the article, I said, you know, what good is to have time travel technology if you can't take also the exploitation opportunity of like selling what you get to all the different versions of the Earth at different times across the eons of time to make money. I mean, it becomes huge. You're talking about potentially trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that can be made, as well as creating a way to escape from whatever is coming down the road that could be really bad. I mean, you've heard of the Great Calling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Yeah, what are we going to do about that?
Exactly.
Right. You can get the heck out of Dodge by fixing time travel to the past and leaving. That's what you do.
Now, what will the time travel apparatus be like, or will it be a simple pill we take? What could it be?
No, it can't be a pill. It has to be a...
It'll be a machine.
It has to actually be an actual technology. And it could take a variety of forms, all right? Because we've messed around with a lot of different types of apparatus and whatnot. But the bottom line is it comes out to two different basic things. It could be what you call a station, or it could be a vehicle, all right? A vehicle is like what you have in Back to the Future. On a DeLorean.
With a flux capacitor, right?
Right. You jump in a DeLorean, and a DeLorean, by the way, what that DeLorean does is called macroscopic quantum tunnel. There's a natural scientific term for what that DeLorean does in terms of its time travel part. Or you could have what you call a station set up, which is like what we saw in movies like, or TV shows like Stargate SG-1 and projects like that. So, you know, with the station, you have a fixed position where you do something that enables you to go back in time. And then you have like a vehicle, of course, and we already know what that is.
Marshall, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and let's pick it up right there. I want to hear more about the time machine and what it could consist of. And are they working on it now? Is somebody working on building one right now? Let us know that. This is fascinating discussion. Marshall Barnes with us. Back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Next hour, we'll take your calls with Marshall Barnes as we talk about time travel. Fascinating discussion. Welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you along with Marshall Barnes as we talk about time travel. Fascinating discussion, Marshall. How did you get interested in this, by the way?
Well, like most people, you know, living in the time period I grew up in, you know, you're not that far away from me, age-wise. You know, it's a fascinating subject. For me, it wasn't so much the movie, The Time Machine, as it was a TV series, The Time Tunnel. But I didn't think you could actually do it. You know, I kind of wondered, but, you know, I wasn't really sure about that. And then later on, many years later, I started to see how there could be possibilities for doing it for real. And I got into physics and all that. And then I started to get serious around 2011 or so because some associates of mine and I got together and said, look, there are these people out there that think that the Earth's population needs to be reduced down to 500 million people. Now, how are they going to do that? Because they're serious. They meet, they talk about these things. How are they going to do that? So, long story short, we figured out probably the best way to do something like that. And then a few years later, I started to see some of those things that we had predicted take place. And I'm like, oh man, this isn't good. You know, I got to get out of here. And the answer was not space. The answer was get back to working on time travel and get out of here that way. Because that's the only thing that's going to save you. That's it, period. You're done. And so that's what I started to do. And, you know, I changed all my focus that I could away from the aerospace industry, which I had been involved in for a number of years, and started focusing on resolving the issues about time travel. Because my head was, you know, gun was to my head, so to speak.
Are there some technological laboratories out there that are working on the apparatuses for time machines?
Well, not that I know of. I mean, my people are doing it. You know, we're working on it. We can't rely on somebody else to do it because, number one, they have to catch up on what the science is. And the science on time travel involves like over 30 different other disciplines that most people don't even know anything about. So, it's like we can't waste time for someone else to catch up. And on top of that, there's this other consideration. There are things that are part of the development of this technology, which can be weaponized, and so they become a national security risk. If it's just you can't allow it to just be in anyone's hands. I can't go around and blab to people, how to try to do it because it'd be a violation of U.S. Code 35, Chapter 17, Segment 181. I had to look it up even just to know what it is so I could quote it. So the government people out there would realize, oh, okay, we don't have to worry about him. He's not going to blab about anything. And then leave me alone, But it's really tricky stuff. It's not something that you can do in your garage,
Right.
Get away with it.
If you go back into time, into the past, can you come back?
Sure. And I'm glad you asked that question because it's not so much, and this is something I just figured out this week, or last week actually. It's not something where you are literally going back into the past. No one goes back into the past. What you're doing is you're doing something that's going to cause the creation of a new parallel universe copy of that past era. But you are not literally in the past. So one of the biggest problems about the subject of the nature of time and time travel is language. A lot of people think that